I will not support this so-called uncontroversial motion. Now, David was very measured in his delivery. I'm sure that there's nobody in this place who's expecting me to be as measured as he was. The Liberal Democrats oppose COVID vaccine mandates. We oppose them as a condition on work, we oppose them as a condition on participation in public life, and we oppose them as a condition on entering this chamber. Throughout this pandemic, this government has used increasingly draconian and tyrannical tactics. Persuasion and trust in the population was never part of this government's response. Having the powers from the state of emergency declaration to use compulsion and coercion on the people, it became the first and the only tool that they used. And yet, with less success than any government in Australia, the hand sanitising and social distancing that we started with became compulsory masks outside, bans on gatherings and stay-at-home orders. Fines grew and police violence escalated. Police broke into people's homes, issued threats to journalists, suppressed demonstrations and fired pepper spray into crowds. Large areas of the state have been COVID-free since day one and have still suffered through more than a year of restrictions and lockdowns. Melbourne is currently in lockdown 6, a lockdown that we were told would be short and sharp, but instead is just sharp. And now you've rolled out the vaccine mandates. Outrageous breaches of the rights of individual Victorians to consent to medical treatment. Forcing employers across the state to fire workers who refuse to bend. And this, when we're clearly going to pass the vaccine targets without the mandates anyway. The government demonstrates that in Victoria, human rights are nothing more than a joke. You might as well issue the Charter of Human Rights as toilet paper in this place. It is what the government's been using it for, and clearly what they believe it is worth. As if all this authoritarianism wasn't sufficient, this government is now trying to expel their opposition from Parliament. This motion is designed to suspend members of Parliament who oppose vaccine mandates. It's a deliberate effort to subvert democracy. You can see it in motion. You can see it in the motion. If this motion succeeds, you'll notice that almost everyone in this chamber is vaccinated. Well, they are, in their own eyes, protected from COVID. If they are protected, then why try to expel unvaccinated people from the chamber? The suspension expires next year. If this government really thinks that the unvaccinated people are a threat to the chamber, why would this motion expire at all? The answer to both questions is clear. This motion is not about protecting anyone from COVID. This motion is about expelling opposition from Parliament. There are thousands of Victorians who are concerned about this vaccine and whose voices deserve to be heard. But you want to silence their voices, as you have been doing all through this state of emergency. This government has been crushing dissent, arresting people for Facebook posts, hunting down, tear-gassing, beating and even opening fire on protesters with potentially lethal ammunition. And today, you turn your fire on the Parliament. Apparently, the government decided the best way to respond to accusations of being power-mad and out of control was to tear up centuries of precedent and expel the members of Parliament who opposed them. The Premier heard Dictator Dan and he liked the sound of it. He decided to lean into it. Drunk on the state of emergency rule by decree, he wanted more power and no voices to speak against him. They say you should never go full Godwin, but it's not me choosing to open that door today. This is not the first time in history we've seen members of a Parliament being expelled. Many will hopefully remember from their high school history lessons how in 1933 in Weimar, Germany, the Nazis purged the Parliament of opposing voices so they could gain a 2/3 majority before passing the Enabling Act that allowed them to rule by decree. You might not like that association, but this is a historical company you're joining today with this motion. The company that any MP that supports this bill today chooses to keep. And the fact that the government will use the opportunity to push through their own secret permanent pandemic powers legislation, their own enabling act, only heightens the comparison. But I'm thinking of Westminster, 1648. Colonel Thomas Pride's purge of the Long Parliament to enable the dictator Cromwell to obtain a majority in order to push through the execution of the deposed King Charles I for high treason. Before, Cromwell then went on to dismiss the Parliament and rule by decree. Well, congratulations. You too will get your own little footnote in history. Lord Protector Andrews and his lackeys. And after Pride's purge, those who remained were named as the Rump Parliament. And this term has then gone down in history as a way to refer to a parliament after it has been purged. And when you next assemble in this place with your Rump Parliament to rubber stamp the government's will, you can smile, knowing that you've further trampled Victorian democracy into the mud. You will have trashed your legitimacy, any that you had left, and cast a shadow over whatever legislation your Rump Parliament sees fit to pass. Now, the shambling factional zombies that pack out the government's backbenches may not really know or care what they're doing today, but we presume some of you must understand all too well. Since the loss of Gavin Jennings, who I'm sure will be ashamed of your actions here today, your government has lacked all moral compass. But let me pause there for a moment to reflect upon the opposition. Rudderless, valueless, spineless. The craven rabble that sit on my right but stand for nothing. The quislings of the Liberal Party. This motion would have been a great opportunity for you to set forth your credentials on why voters should support you for government. But no. Instead, this is your manifesto for why you shall never be anything but the opposition. Permanent, controlled opposition. Until, one day, not even that. What secret deal did you do with the government? History may remember a small note about this government's infamy today, but you will be forgotten, which will be all that you deserve. Hang your heads in shame if you vote for this today. Hang your heads in shame. We often talk about virtue signalling in this place, but today, voting for this motion is a chance to signal your lack of virtue. And any member of the crossbench who supports this today can stop pretending they care about parliamentary process or democracy. They will reveal themselves as dupes or just grubby collaborators. Victoria, and indeed Australia, did not slip into a police state in 2020 with the declaration of emergency powers. Freedoms and human rights have been steadily eroded for decades now. We've allowed our governments to get away with more and more in the name of safety, and so we've let our liberties trickle through our fingers. VicPol's response to the protest did not spring fully formed from the Premier's brow during the second lockdown last year. A culture of impunity and lawlessness has been growing there for a long time. We have passed laws that dispense with human rights in the name of defeating organised crime. The FBOs that we debated last night being one such. The Star Chamber of the Chief Examiner being another outrageous example. This House of Review has been asleep at the wheel, waving through these abuses. And now the whirlwind is in the thorn bush. The lines between the government, the bureaucracy, the police and the courts have been blurred. Separation of power is no longer a thing in Victoria. This state needs a Fitzgerald Royal Commission to dig into the muck. The stand we take here today is not a fight against vaccines. I have never made a secret of the fact that I am pro-vaccine. I got my vaccine shots as soon as I was eligible. I continue to encourage people to get vaccinated, especially if they fall into a risk category. The stand we take here today is not a fight for ourselves. We could easily present our details, show we've met the government's medical criteria for being allowed to participate in public life, and continue to sit comfortably in these chairs. The stand we take today is for choice. The stand we take today is for the Victorians who have been coerced to take vaccines despite strong objections, and those who, despite the pressure, despite being forced to risk their jobs, their homes, their families' futures, are refusing to comply. I stand in solidarity with these Victorians, and I will not comply.